Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. This is Mark Cleghorn. Welcome to the Photographer Academy and one of our Top Tog webinars. And I'm absolutely thrilled to death tonight, to be honest. We've got one of the most amazing photographers on our planet today, Tim Flach. I'll tell you how I discovered Tim actually later on when we get to meet him and so on actually online. If this is the first time that you've been on a webinar, it might be a little bit strange for you because you're going to be looking at a screen. There's no webcam or video. That's so we can kind of see the images at the maximum resolution. We get nice and clear voice and so on with it. There is a slight delay at times between perhaps seeing a photograph or a little bit of voice delay and so on. So don't worry about that. So at this stage, if you're viewing the webinar, you should be able to the kind of Facebook icon on the top left-hand side and the clock down in the bottom left-hand side, and fingers crossed you should be hearing my voice. So if anybody's got any problems with that, just actually drop a question in the question panel. Speaking about the question panel, we've got lots of time at the end of today's presentation, and Tim's agreed that he'll actually do questions live and so on. We've already had loads actually put through even before the webinar begins, in fact, really, so we're ready for that. So don't leave it to the last minute to get your questions in case we run out of time, because we are scheduled to run for around about an hour. So if you're unfamiliar what the Photographer Academy is, we're an online training company for photographers. We've been running for around about 5 years now with 13,500 members online. It is a paid membership, but we do have a free learning resource as well, and these webinars are a part of that as well, and there's a free view section. And we are recording Tim's webinar with us tonight, so if you're unable to watch it all or you're coming in late, then you will be able to actually relive this webinar for free on the next 7 days on the Photographer Academy website. The quickest way to get to us is pt4u.tv. So with that in mind, just a kind of a quick heads up really, we've also got some amazing a week on competitions running on our Facebook pages because of a move that we've just done away from our old branding, which is Photo Training for You, and kind of now coming into, as I said, the Photographer Academy. So that's my ugly mug on the left-hand side. I'm Mark Cleghorn. I'm the Director of Training on the Photographer Academy. Fingers crossed I'm still a photographer as well, but it's pretty much taken over my whole life. So I suppose at this stage I should stop the waffle and we should meet our amazing photographer for the night, which is the magnificent Tim Flach. Tim, are you with us?
I certainly am. It's great to be here with you.
Tim, I know you're a little bit strange because you're used to speaking in front of hundreds of people in front of you instead of actually looking at your own photographs on a monitor.
Looking at my screen. I'm here actually, guys, in my studio on my ISO screen looking at it. So it is certainly a new one for me.
Great. I mean, obviously, we've got lots of images to kind of look through and everything else with it. I suppose before we get going, Tim, I'm sure you're going to kind of cover this a little bit during your webinar anyway with us, but how did you get into photography in the first place?
I've always been sort of wired for it, well, more inclined to do image rather than word things. And my background is I went to St. Martin's and did painting, and in a way, the way I ended up taking pictures was the first time on a foundation course at 20. So I was quite late to actually taking a picture, but I think in a way my work's always been informed by the fact that I did a lot of drawing and painting when I was younger.
And so was it an art degree that you did that involved photography, or was it ended up as a photographic kind of main concept to the end of the degree?
Well, my first degree was actually communication design, so there was a very small element, like an introduction, but it wasn't a photographic course. And then I did painting after that, a postgraduate. So in fact, very little formal training as a photographer.
Right. How did you first get into animal photography then?
Well, one of the first rolls of film I took was actually on a foundation course, and they asked me to fulfill certain compositional criteria, and we were sent off to London Zoo with our first roll of film. So in a way, the very beginning of my work in photography involved animals, but in fact it wasn't until about 10 years into my career, trying to make any way I could to pay the rent and get started and buy my first cameras from PR to press, that I did a project involving animals. And I just liked that uncertainty that the animals brought into the studio situation.
Perfect. We're going to talk about some of your books later on and so on, and the kind of work where, well, obviously the place where your work goes now, including galleries and so on with it. But I'm just flicking up a few of your images, kind of just coming up on screen for those who are not familiar with Tim's work. I basically discovered you. I'll say I didn't discover you, of course, but when I kind of found out the world of Tim's world, as it were, of animals, it was through The Apprentice, the UK series with Alan Sugar, and I believe the apprentices were charged with selling your work and so on, and I was sat in a hotel room all by myself, waiting to actually do a workshop the next day, and I watched these guys kind of putting up your work on the walls, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. And that was all based to do with your Equus work and so on, and I'm sure you're going to be showing us some images tonight. So Tim, I don't think we should delay anymore. Just a bit of a heads up. I will be putting some links through to the question board and the chat board anyway, so if you want to go off following today's webinar and kind of purchase some of Tim's books and so on, I'll give you the direct links. You can go to there, as well as Tim's website at the end and so on with it. So Tim, I think it's that time. I should hand over the screen to you, and you should take hold of the presentation as such. Just going to pass that across, and just while Tim,
Mark, as I said, do sort of come into this if at any point it needs to.
Tim, I've got about 70 questions come through already, so I don't think we're going to run out of things to chat about at all with it.
We're just trying to get you so you guys can see our screen at the moment.
Brilliant. There we go.
That might have done it.
That's it. We're visual. Go ahead.
Excellent. Hold on. I think we're just doing a couple of things. Right. One of the things that has always intrigued me about photography is that sometimes you look at a picture and it can resonate something, but it's not necessarily clear in meaning it. So what you're seeing here is the back of a pig's ears, but I think it is reasonable for me to assume that many of you have jumped to the conclusion that it might be an elephant or a pig, but not the part of the pig you thought. So this idea that flesh is something that in effect resonates beyond, and the fact you think you see eyes, but it's actually the back of the ears of this guy. One of the things that fascinates me about imagery is how you can bring certain debates using it with respect to the animal. So here what we have is a natural mutant of a Belgian blue, which is has a muscling. So what you got here is actually the predominant meat sold in the supermarket without veining. Or marbling, I should say, is produced by this animal that has less fat than chicken. This shot here shows me photographing a featherless chicken. I wanted to show it in case there was sort of view that maybe the next shot is something that's either model made, but actually this guy's been bred in Israel to supply meat to the third world, and I think it raises lots of ambiguities. The chicken effectively is a natural mutant, not genetics, and they have crossbred it to go from a hen laying to a broiler chicken. But I think what's interesting is that many of us today, our knowing of animals has changed so much over the last few generations. For example, we're most likely to know a chicken as something without feathers on and without the head on in cellophane in the supermarket. And that we know animals better today in a virtual sense than we ever have before. So Attenborough, for example, might have a microlight following a sequence of wild dogs pursuing their prey, or rhinos at night being gregarious. My point is really that we know them. We've never known animals so well in a virtual sense, but in actuality we've never been more separated. And I think this raises some very important debates about where we're going, given the conundrums of the success of our own species. This series of fruit bats, for me, is interesting because it brings forth debates about habit of viewing. The fact is we entertain these guys the wrong way up because we're used to the eyes being above the feet. We're used to the kind of richness associations of Batman, as in good bat and bad bat Dracula. And for this is why I find subjects like this are chosen subjects, because of what they evoke. It is much easier for us to place human values on these when they're the wrong way up, to anthropomorphize. On this occasion, she could be having a hard day. Actually, I'm going to go back because I know there's a delay on the timing, I understand. The images here of the bat, for me, was interesting because Linnaeus, the taxonomist, he described the fruit bats in the same group as the primates and us, but in years to come, they recognized through DNA sequencing that actually the bat was closer to a vermin than it was to us. But here, it's, for me, not just about what a subject evokes, so it is itself, which is obviously a bat flying away from us, but how it's easy to jump to associations like Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine, or being reminded of how human the arms are. For me, this is very revealing of an animal that's used very much as an ambassador. Interesting enough, that the pandas had a long political, it's very much a political animal, but as the symbol of the World Wildlife Fund, immensely part of our kind of a hugely strong symbol. And I would probably argue, who has seen the back of a panda? And yet, it is very evident that you know instantly what you're looking at. In this case, it could be karaoke. This picture is for me very much, well, it's a chimp with alopecia, but it obviously brings us close to thoughts about ourselves, and also almost could be from some film. But Jumbo's is a resident of Twycross.
You still there, Tim? I've just lost your sound a little bit.
I'm here, very
Sorry.
much so. That's okay. This is in Miami.
I should say there's a little bit of a delay on the video. It won't run smooth here. It's just a little bit choppy as such, really, but it looks great.
Interesting enough, I have one thing that is I've always been intrigued by is how the eye moves through space, and in this case the cat came in from left to right, but the main lighting couldn't be placed in way of the cat. So I knew before I shot it, I'd flip it. I've used the saliva here almost as a lead-in to the composition. A lot of my images of these are color variants. They're being bred by private owners who believe that they're saving animals that would otherwise have existed in the wild, but don't today, and that zoos would feel the gene pool isn't big enough. But I very much believe in this idea that you need to have that sense of the gaze, and the fact that there's this sense of intensity as it looks at you, provoking certain questions about, what do they think of us? What have we done to them? These color variants have been crossbred to create these colorations. it evokes certain ethical questions. For example, my understanding is that there are 5,000 or over 5,000 tigers in the wild. Sorry, in captivity. I'm not used to looking at a screen without everyone seeing people's faces. 5,000 in captivity, and yet there are only 3,500 in the wild. This one is called a liger, a cross between a tiger and a lamb, or tigress to be more precise. It's actually in the Guinness Book of Records as the largest cat in the world. It's 11 foot long. So this is a hybrid that's been bred just because it's a huge exotic pet. One of the things I'm very interested in is the symbolism of animals. Many of my subject here have been brought in the studio partly because I want to explore them almost like biological objects. Here in the UK, our Mayor of London, former Mayor Ken Livingstone, described the pigeons as flying rats. In fact, genetically speaking, the pigeon comes directly from the rock dove, as does the dove. And you could argue that genetically they're pretty much the same. The difference is color. Color, the difference between the Holy Spirit or purity and a rat, a flying rat. I find this interesting. When I was doing my project on dogs, it became clear that there were many dog rescue centers that couldn't house the black dogs and were left in the situation to have to put them down. This is a...
Sorry, Tim, we've got a couple of questions going through, a lot about composition. Obviously, because some of the animals are moving so fast and kind of really out of your control, how or what is your most important part when you're framing the shot? Is it space around the image and cropping in later on, or is it kind of really filling the frame straight from the word go?
Well, I think this will come a bit clearer later on. I'm very interested in composition and dynamic structure, and I'm constantly looking at work by the great masters. I mean, as much painting as anything else rather than just photography. And the way the eye moves through space is for me, something that I value. Where does the eye move? And so when I'm photographing animals, I'm usually, for the main part, realizing the picture almost as you see it. But I'm not saying this is always the case, because sometimes it happens so quickly that I have to do a degree of reframing. But essentially, I do pretty much shoot as you see, but the lighting is often left to right. It often means the main interest points are naturally on the left-hand side, and that I'm very conscious of how we create space, even the simplest frames. I think I'll go back so you can see this one. The three-banded armadillo is the only one that naturally can form, go in a total ball. This banana cockroach is part of a research program on antibiotics, which I was linking to my last book. Just as this guy could be Darth Vader, I'm very interested in this idea of kind of how culturally we're informed by the subject by these subjects. These are millipedes. Again, you'll often see that I lead the eye in the bottom left-hand corner around the composition. I recently took some people. I printed one of this print onto a cashmere scarf. And I was trying to use the scarf almost so it became integrated with the figure. This is a picture which I can assure you my model here didn't come to a sticky end. We actually went to a school by biological suppliers to get ourselves something to feed our model on the day. So he wasn't alive, I can assure you. That is the frog in the mouth. This is reminds of this shot which I did some years back, and I think there were red-eyed tree frogs to be found a lot in advertising after that. Was a difficult model. He essentially decided to jump on my lens hood and stick himself, and I had to spend time extracting him on about 3 occasions. And then to my surprise, he started changing to a khaki brown color, and I had to return him to a box with an ultraviolet light source, and he then reoccupied the sort of colors you see here, and then we put him on the leaf, and he pretended to be dead, and we were convinced we'd lost the model, and we put him into the box, and he started hopping around. So it took a whole day. He certainly had us working hard and very confused. It made us very confused on the day. This is I was looking at neoteny, which is a kind of infantile state of the salamander, or known as the oxalotl. It's interesting, when you see this guy, you can't but help want to make the gills into eyes. And I'm fascinated by how we want to occupy human qualities. How inevitably we have to centralize ourselves to understand things, an inevitable outcome of who we are, and also the outcome of some of the things we do. These jellyfish are East Coast sea nettles. This is an interesting candidate here. This particular, I've taken a page from my book here, and it says alien invaders. The thing about this jellyfish is that it could easily be a good candidate for a sci-fi movie spaceship going off into the galaxy. But in fact, this jellyfish got inadvertently moved into the Black Sea and caused the collapse of the anchovy fishing there. And I find this sort of layering that I believe strongly that photography quality is often powerful when it's linked to ambiguity, when it can have several different layers of meaning. In this case, this particular jellyfish, the protein to be found in it, the green fluorescent protein known as GFP, was to revolutionize molecular chemistry. And I followed this through from the one jellyfish that was in captivity in America and photographed the mouse where it's used. And this is done under ultraviolet light, and it actually emanates these colors. This is the blind eye of a Arabian horse. In this series here, I took a horse embryo. What fascinates me is how the only embryos that are regularly transferred by humans on an individual basis are human and horses. And incidentally, the camera right here is not the head, but it's camera left. It's so easy to find the baby. This model was part of a grooming competition, and it was the owner of the dog wanted it to imitate a character in Court's Brides, the film, and it was essentially 5 hours of grooming. Now, interesting, the dog didn't seem to make any complaints because grooming is natural behavior. For me, I'm intrigued by the fact that there is a kind of natural outrage being outraged by the fact that we would do this to a dog, and why would we do this? And this space interests me because we have to center our existence in relation to what we think as human, and the fact is, behaviorally, it's a question of, I didn't see the dog objecting. And this intrigues me. This is a poodle, just curious enough. This is a case of surgery done on Dobermans, which is practiced in America, the owners believing that it helps the dog look more beautiful and thus they treat them better. It was banned in the UK 100 years ago, and it's a surgical procedure. For me, this shot is intriguing because it kind of leaves the viewer in similar space to the cockerel. You know, what are we looking at? Has it been lacquered? Is it natural? Is questions I think it provokes. You'll see later how it was shot, and it reminds yourself it's both unfamiliar, and yet it could be a sort of West Highland Terrier, the face. It's a Hungarian pulley, which is actually just jumping over a jump. Or it could be a mop in this case, well, without a handle, of course. Incidentally, that was taken at my studio here in London. One of the things I was mentioning was composition. So this picture was taken on location in the north of England, actually where the Guinness estate is, a place called Elvedon. So often I like the landscapes to have a heritage. But here what you've got is the dog is really jumping through the bracken, and we've got someone here releasing pheasants. Unfortunately, most of them go in the wrong direction. I've lit the scene with some flashlights, all colored to the same temperature as the ambient light. If you take the lead in, you come into the dog and you go up to the bird, the first cockerel and the cock, and then up to the hen, and then back round. If you look more closely, camera right bottom, you'll see one in the bracken. Now I suggest that at first many of you didn't see that. It's because I'm leading the eye through a certain dynamic structure, in the knowledge that it's only when you're not thinking about the picture that you necessarily find the additional bird. This is Levens Hall in the north of England. It's one of the oldest maintained topo gardens, is in the Guinness Book of Records, the longest maintained topo garden. The Tux, the poodle here, was on the European tour at the moment. The owner, a wealthy American, had already shown the dog in the States and was at the moment wanting it to do crafts and do its bit over here. And it had its own sunbed and glasses so that it could have its bum suitably toned. This idea of manicuring, controlling, is something that obviously for me resonates many of the bigger questions about how we manage and the outcome of our own management, how we shape, the questions of how we shape and things, nature, and how it shapes us. Dogs are always a very powerful form of metaphor. This is a series of ads that's about to run for Barclays. I've just included something to show how I've, in a sense, used, well, follow the compositions I mentioned earlier, working left to right, and how we kind of cast the models to fit the animals and then finalize the casting of the models once we saw how the shots of the animals were working out.
Tim, just to stop on that for a minute, just because you're kind of talking about commissioned work there and so on, there's quite a lot of quite a lot of questions going through about is most of your work in a commission vein, or is it kind of a project that leads on to sales?
It's very difficult to know where one can describe what is direct commission, and this is one in case. I seem to go through phases. When I'm doing the book projects, I have to turn down commissions. In a way, the art world is often not perceived as the commercial, when in actual fact there's a kind of commercial market, clearly. In answer to the question, it's a fairly, I've tried to fit commissions in between my book projects, but at the moment I'm caught in that kind of space where we're just putting a couple of proposals for museums shows, and I'm doing work for galleries, and I'm also doing the odd commissions in between. So I'm kind of caught between the different worlds, really. So I try to juggle it. But also, commercially speaking, the selling of prints is also as important commercial revenue as you could argue my commissioned work.
The exhibitions that you talked about, is this something that is going to be growing more and more within your work now in the likes of galleries, or how do you see your work being shown for the kind of remainder of your career?
The way it's going is that I'm showing more and more around the world, and it will probably give me more time to do work where I can bring my own personal stamp or sensibility through the work. The problem with advertising is often that is taken away from you in the latter stages, perhaps because of interest from agencies and retouching or such. And so yes, the answer is I will definitely be doing more work in what you might say the arts practice. And I think the pursuing of museum shows is much more to do with the debates around what I think are prominent questions. And that is something that may not be very commercial, but I feel is a very important part of the journey, because I feel that if you've got a voice, then you should use it for hopefully relevant discussions or ideas.
Oh, obviously with many of the animals that you're photographing, are they kind of used with a trainer? So are they, obviously the tigers and so on, they're wild animals, but obviously the little bit of video that we saw there, is it working within zoos, or is it working with specialist companies as such, really? Or how do you get around to actually ending up photographing a tiger shaking its head full of water as such? How does that happen? How does that kind of come off?
Many of the times I'm working with institutions which actually are often working with the conservation of animals. You'll see later that, for example, the panda was done in Chengdu, which is the breeding center. And sometimes when I'm working, say, for aspinals with gorillas, I don't have the option to go in with the gorilla or bring it into a studio. It would be really inappropriate to do that. And so I have to develop techniques where I can take the light through the glass and create the kind of stylization that I don't want to sort of see the straw in the area, but actually allow the viewer to be occupied with the subject and not be distracted by its environment. I can show more evidence of how I work with the animals later on in the presentation.
Okay, sorry Tim, carry on.
No, it's fine. I just say this is a Bichon frieze that I did for my book God's Dogs. I was just amused at how I found some things on the internet which were, I thought, quite amusing interpretations of my own work. So I'm going to just move through them. Anyway, I just think that I'm amused at how people reappropriate or interpret my work. I couldn't come up with these ideas. This is actually one of the things I really value about making pictures, is that you should always respect what's in front of the camera. So even with a barcode, I like to create a barcode, not to say it doesn't say margarine, but so that it actually brings aspects to something which I couldn't necessarily find. This series they've got really peculiar names. I'm going to flip through quite fast and explain the background to these. This is a zonkey. It's a zebra and a zorse. So this is a cross between a donkey and a zebra, and a horse and a zebra. I find it curious because we can, we do. Not because they actually have any function. One of the things that I remember reading about Irving Penn, he was discussing the importance of the modernists. And of course, Mies van der Rohe comes to mind. And I've always been interested in this idea, how much information do you need to show or to indicate to both allow the mind to wander within a picture and yet to, in a sense, root it in an understanding of what it is initially. So here we have a horse withers and neck, and yet you could be reflecting on your ski holiday or something else. I don't know. I'm not trying to read people's minds here, but I do like this idea of the potentiality of something when you reduce it down to just to what is the bare essentials. So this could be a bad hair day. This is actually a treadmill, so I'm wondering whether I was stupid enough to put myself behind a galloping thoroughbred. Often I think of photography as a great way of kind of extending experiences. This idea of actually how you take a picture, and much of my work is about not trying to be, like I say, to actually shift the experiences to, in a sense, often I stylize more to make that sort of, to get the viewer to engage, because you bring something else to it. In this case, I'm going down, if you can imagine this, I'm down a track going at 30 miles an hour. I have my camera, my Hasselblad of one window, my assistant with the laptop in the back. And behind us, without trying to bump into us, we have two people with ProPhoto softboxes like studio lights, mobile lights, trying to go in tandem with us as we're going down this track, so that the pictures can explore details of dilation of the nostrils and the veins, something that just would extend or change the experience you might have of an event photographer standing on the side of a track and taking a picture. Admittedly, this is an Arabian, so it's slightly different to what a thoroughbred would look like.
A lot of questions going on about the ring flash. Is that a popular thing that you use, Tim?
Yes. The reason that I use the ring quite often is not just because the practicality of being able to hold it. It's often what I'm trying to do when I'm using flash, particularly here outside. What you're seeing is I've got flash on the hill, and I want to bring the value of the tones down and give it stylization. But I need to make sure that I replace the shadow light with what would normally be ambient light. So I will often gel the light to be colder, and I pop it in. But it's also got to do in the studio with the fact that if you have a portrait and you don't want to have lots of reflectors like polyboards, you know, in a sense obscuring some of the iris of the eye, you can use a point of light, and then you can often take that out. But also what's more important is it creates a more textural fill-in light, a more spectral light source, which I often prefer. I don't always use a ring, but on location it's much more practical. Also, when you're on location, you don't totally reduce all the ambient light. So in a way, you've already got some soft light around.
And has Hasselblad always been your choice of medium format?
Certainly with medium. I think once you start a system, you're in a way wedded to that. And I've also, I started with a V-series camera. Went from, so in a way I've moved to digital with Hasselblad.
What about DSLR? Do you use DSLR at all, or is it all medium format?
I'd certainly use Canon, in fact, for images where the subject's a long way away, or where I'm doing something where my subject is really very, very small, like the Pupa series, which you'll see later, where it optically is better to shoot on a small format camera than a medium format camera. So I'm a believer in finding what is the most appropriate medium, and that I use Hasselblad where it is best served. One of the reasons that we did a lot of Hasselblad for subjects that you probably imagine would historically have been done with a small format camera was I was using Flash, and my Flash synchronization speeds were much higher using the Hasselblad, and allowed me not only to get maybe less frames in actuality, but at least I was able to bring a stylization to the shot. This picture shows me working with a halter horse, which is effectively a show horse in Ajman. Now, I wanted, this particular horse is like a supermodel of the equine world. They're not ridden, and I wanted to use the frame of the window almost like a metaphor for a picture or painting, but actually it is a desert. So by using Flash, as you'll see, it literally, well, I'll show you the picture. So what you're looking at here is literally an umbrella in a couple of stables down being brought into view of the horse to create this twist and turn. But the colorations for me remind me of George Stubbs painting in the National Gallery called Whistle Jacket. So this idea of the kind of playing with this layers of kind of, how can I say, resonating something that people feel that they know but they don't necessarily are aware of, kind of affect the way we read the picture.
How much post-production are you doing to the images?
Well, probably surprisingly little, because what I'm really doing is I'm stylizing the images, which I suppose brings the images into question. I mean, the more you evidently stylize the picture, the more you question it, particularly with tones, because I'm using Flash and mixing them outside. But actually, I'm someone who believes that it's so important to have something to respect what lies in front of the camera. You know, I'm sort of this, so I don't think I'm smart enough or able enough to construct something from nothing and to have the richness of potentiality in the picture. So whereas, you know, it is ironic that some documentary photographers are not as transparent as they might be. And historically, we know about Dorothy Land's Migrant Mother. We know about Eugene Smith's and his shots where his wife unfortunately published his contact sheets after his death, which reveals a lot of more manipulation than one would imagine that the truth of, you know, the documentary photographer might be. I do place a lot of value on what is in front of the camera, yet I'm mindful that there's always going to be question marks behind the authenticity of what I do. This is Iceland, And this picture is a good point, actually, because we're speaking about authenticity. And in fact, these horses are in a surreal landscape. And in fact, I did actually change. It got a bit icy, and they ran off for about an hour. And I was taking this picture, as you see here. I had to place them back in the same area again. But generally, everything you see here is realized, if I'm making any sense. So the same scene. But one of the horses went off for a few hours, but they went off together and I had to retrieve them. But this is obviously a picture you'd question, could it possibly be real? But they were actually running in the landscape, as you saw.
And do the animals get very spooked by the use of flash?
Surprisingly, as not as much as you might suspect. There's always exceptions. But it's actually, for horses particularly, as they're flight animals, known as precocial animals, they have a tendency to be absolutely spooked by things that flap, or when an animal can't see what's going on, then they're very, very threatened. But the flash itself is surprisingly not often a problem.
I think the biggest questions that we've got going through, Tim, is the zebra and the barcode. How did you light it, and how many lights were involved?
I think the majority of that was there was one edge light, which is a big broncolor. You call it hazy light, but it's a large softbox above. And then I just used essentially ring flash because what I wanted to emphasize was patterning. So what I want to do is pretty much flatten the image down to pattern. So if I'd had too much shadow going on, it wouldn't have worked as a kind of patterning between the graphics and the zebra. But I did have just a little bit side light to give it some form. This is Iceland, and these are fumaroles, sulfur gas coming out of the ground. I wanted to use them almost like a metaphor for a sense of industry. Well, actually, it's all very natural. Sometimes I spend 5 days up a mountain to get this orthographic or graphic cloud formation because I wanted to show a horse that is essentially a mountain horse, the half-linger. One of the things that, again, going back to this ambiguity, looking at this, if you happen to have horses, you probably recognize what it is. But if you don't, you kind of think, well, why are we dressing this horse up? What's this about? What strangeness is this? But being a fly net, if you know it's a fly net, then it's it doesn't lead to certain other associations. The thing about the horses for me is that I wanted to explore how to explain the investment into horses, both from leisure, warfare, medicine, sport, and the Mars series offered me that opportunity. This is measuring the volume of oxygen uptake, the VO2 of a thoroughbred. This is actually an asthma inhaler, and in fact the capsule on the end actually has a diagram showing a human how to use it. And this is actually a gas mask from the Imperial War Museum. And this is from Leeds Armory. So this is actual armor from the actual armor of how a horse would have looked. It's not just a bit of theatre. This is actually how it would have looked if you'd been in the 16th century.
Sorry, Tim, I'm not sure if I've missed something, but that series of images you're just showing us now with the finishing with the Alma image, did you just explain about why that series was put together, or is that just a combination that you're showing?
Sorry, the armor here.
Yeah, and the previous images as well with the asthma inhaler and the gas mask and so on. Are those a part of a project that you set out to do, or are they just a series of images that you've put together?
They were part of my book, Equus, and in it I had a lot of landscapes, but I also wanted to show the various investment in the horse and its function and how it was utilized by us. So it was a way of producing something that evoked, for me, evoked something. For example, the shot here is a head protector. It's much more ambiguous, but it's actually, you'll see, it's after they use anesthetic on a horse. They need to stop them hurting themselves. But also, it sort of looks a bit like a boxing mask. I like this ambiguity, but the function of the pictures was to really show how the role the horse had played, whilst keeping to an abstract, well, you might say, keeping it to a set of images. This is shows the situation at Tricross. Where I'm actually doing bonobos, which they're very much like chimps. They have a similar proximity to us genetically, and but they're a matriarchal rather than patriarchal society. But here, what you can see is a broncolor light that's called a satellite evolution, and it allows you to take a beam of light, and in a sense here you can see it will focus the light, so almost get a black background, thus in a sense not distinguishing it from something that might have been done in a studio. These guys are known to have a slightly different structure. They occupy the other side of the Congo River, bonobos. They have the same 98.4 genetic link to us, but they are known to negotiate disputes using sex and rather than just bashing each other up. I'm not saying they don't use violence, but they have a tendency to negotiate disputes differently to the chimpanzees, thus offering us, in many different respects, a different social model to our nearest relative.
Can you just clarify, Tim, that these are all shot through glass?
Yes, that's right. This is, and it's one light effectively. I don't think there's even a ring in there. Sometimes on a cockroach that I showed earlier, I had 14 lights on that cockroach, and when sometimes other opportunities I might only use one light. I had no choice here. I couldn't position any lights in the set, so I kept it very simple. This is also true of the gorilla here, which is part of a program of reintroduction. This gorilla from Port Lynn, Asthma Foundation, has been reintroduced with the entire troop back into Africa. This is one light, again, with I think a bit of ring against the glass. So if you can imagine, I have literally a piece of cloth around my camera. I'm shooting through glass, and I have a light to my far left, camera left, and then I have a little ring just trying to pop something in. Probably shot on 300mm lens, so quite some far away, some distance away. But it gives a texture of light, which is what I'm after. This is a mandrill.
Sorry, Tim, we've got a variety of questions going through about are the windows specially clean for you before the shoot?
I think they tried their best, because I think they can be a bit, there's lots of monkey business, I guess, in this situation, and they can make quite a mess. And they usually also the chimps and the bonobos, they tend to come up and sort of bash the glass to say hi, I'm around, and thus sort of mess it up a bit. But they try the best they can to get in there and clean it for us, but it's never perfect. But it's surprising how much you can knock out of focus when something's very close to you.
How do the chimps and the apes react with flash? Is it a distraction to them, or are they pretty calm?
No, they're fine. I mean, you know, it's more about how they react to us. I mean, I had my assistant who one of the chimps obviously didn't like very much, and every time he came near the glass, he went bashing the glass. So it is a lot to do with the kind of way they feel the people around, and also a lot of the time the chimps will actually sort of beat their chests, and they're really just saying hi, and if you beat your chest back, they kind of understand that as a greeting. So it is about, I mean, with animals anyway, I take a lot of interest in kind of the people close to the animals to understand their behavior, so that I, in a sense, have opportunity. But also, it's more than that. I just find the journey of inquiry really satisfying, and the fact you get more out of it because you're interested, as the people around you, in the subject of photographing.
Obviously, when you're working in the likes of a zoo, because of health and safety alone, with the equipment that you have with you, obviously the zoos are shut when you're photographing. Is that correct?
Yes, they'd normally arrange, if not shut, they would certainly arrange a way that was clearly safe for their visitors. I think quite often they can't shut them, but they would perhaps make a principally a cordoned off area so that they could still be viewed, but they weren't going to get tripped over by us.
So do you become another exhibit on the day itself?
I think sometimes we end up with almost as many viewers as the monkey, but there you go. It depends, yes. This orangutan actually was brought to the zoo about 25 years ago, and it was supposed to be for a breeding program. And then they did DNA sequencing at the time and recognized there was a hybrid, Bornean Sumatran crossbreed. So this animal had to have a vasectomy, and it spent 25 years very much isolated because they couldn't breed with them. So it's fascinating how husbandry of the zoos has changed with information, but it creates other challenges and conundrums for them. This is a project where they were looking at capuchins. They wear the habit that's a bit like the Capuchin monks. And a guy, Professor Chen, introduced a monetary system into a troop of capuchins, which one of the outcomes of it apparently was reported in the New York Times, that one of the males used the currency to try and buy sex from the female. So, you know, that was a rather surprising outcome of that project. But I was trying to get the image to, in a sense, evoke that sense of analysis. What they did find is the animals were very risk aversive. So maybe have done a better job of the last, when we hit the dark days of the banking crisis. They apparently have a natural tendency not to be risk aversive. A lot of my pictures kind of borrow compositional devices, particularly from painting. Here I hope you can see how the hand on the far camera left helps lead you up into a kind of circular composition. Obviously we're used to these kind of compositions very much from painters, not just Caravaggio, but many of that period of groups of people tightly surrounding. These guys, so in a way I think that pictures can resonate things because of the way they borrow certain aesthetic traditions. I know that a lot of you might be thinking, well, Tin's work is very anthropomorphic. The problem I have with that kind of description is that the main concern for me is how we have to comprehend and understand our world through ourselves, and that brings the challenges of being human. And that sort of idea of anthropocentrism is something that I think is something we cannot avoid but consider how that influenced the way we both understand animals, manage animals, and some of the challenges and conundrums we face with the success of our species and where we go for the future generations. So this brings me to the last of the images that I'm showing you guys. And again, it's this idea of it looks back at you and you question, what does it think of yourselves? The whole debate about what does an animal understand of you often opens up, where do the ethical barriers lie? How accountable are we to them? So that's the images for this evening. I don't know, Mark, if you want to ask me some questions.
Oh, Tim, we have questions that we could go on till midnight with here. Let's start with your. We'll keep on your screen for a minute, if that's okay with you. Apertures and lenses. Can you just talk about it, because there seems to be a lot of huge depth of field going on here. Can you just explain your basic technique, if you wouldn't mind?
A lot of my work, yes, I've used a reasonable depth of field. That's partly because where I've done that, it's often been done to do with trying to, in this case, you've got to, well, trying to, in a sense, take the scale away from it. So here you're looking at a very, very small capuchin, and yet you don't necessarily have evidence of its scale. So by having a reasonable depth of field, it permits the mind to wander into how it relates to, you know, maybe a primate rather than just a monkey. Many of my other images, I'm working at f-stops around 18 and 20, particularly with some of the studio shots. But I think that's not always the case. Obviously, when you relate those kind of f-stops to 35mm, that would be rather closed down. But in the medium format, obviously, you've got to sometimes compensate for loss of depth. I would probably try and shoot more like 16 where I could.
And do you have a favorite lens to use?
I generally find myself on the medium format between 100 and the 150 most of the time. I'd like to think that I picked the right tool, you know, that you pick whatever is right on the occasion.
How important is it to run with assistants during these projects that you're running?
I think that because I'm dealing with animals and I need someone sort of waving the chicken, be it, or a piece of meat, if the handlers aren't doing that, the animal handlers, then my assistants are very important. I normally have a first assistant and then maybe an additional second assistant on many occasions. Where, for example, I was doing like the cockerel in Israel, the featherless chicken, I just had one person because the practicalities of getting someone out there was more difficult. So where I can, I will often have a couple of people, but it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it's just me and somebody with the animal.
And going back to some of the shots where the horses were in the stables, and also some of the Equus images where they had obviously the likes of the nose bag on and the kind of the gas mask and the ulma. Can you explain the lighting that you're using at that section?
Yes, in that particular case, I'm using ProPhoto location lights because we couldn't guarantee having any power. Many of the horses with the mask series, they were effectively, I mean, I might just come out of that and show you that. Many of those had to be done in stables effectively. So in effect, I couldn't guarantee that I could have a main supply. And so I'm normally using one softbox with a ring flash as a fill-in to etch the shadows. So I'm kind of controlling that. The background is actually black velvet, literally put to the back of the stable, and because it sucks the light a bit like a sponge, it is possible to have it quite close to your subject. You don't need great distance, and you get that sense of you can work in quite a small space.
There's loads of people saying that they're going to be off to the zoo on the weekend now, thanks to you. But you do workshops at all, Tim, or not?
I haven't done, no. I've been asked to do odd talks, obviously, to universities over the years, particularly abroad. So that I'm fairly active with, as I think it's very important to externalize what you do. And my plan to do more public work in museum spaces, I think will probably mean that it will be important for me to bridge that. But in terms of workshops, no, I've never had any requests specifically for that.
I've just got to say there's, okay, I know quite a few people on here who are the horse photographers, as it were, and they're all very excited that you're on, and thank you so much for actually for joining them tonight, and they can't believe that you're actually kind of sharing all your knowledge. Thank you so Tim, much on that, Tim. Wendy, who's a big fan, I know, like she is, she said she's so excited she can't think of an intelligent question to ask, even though she wants to ask a lot of them. It's quite funny when you're held in so much awe, Tim. What else? Let's go to the power of the agent was asked. As far as obviously at the kind of the level that you are now, how important is the commissions just coming through an agent instead of a direct kind of commission, as it were?
The thing about having people representing you is that, I mean, like all things, over the years I've tried to spend more time doing what I like to do, which is to work the images and to craft them and to work with the ideas. And when I'm working with agents, what we call them, representatives, photographic representatives, is that they should be doing things that I either am allowed to be freed up to take pictures. So I haven't really gone out with my portfolio for many years. I've left it to them. It isn't that agents always realize the pictures, so the commissions, because quite often we will get inquiries and we'll put them onto the agent, and the agent would get 25% of fee. That's normally what is done. And but what I was going to say is that for me it's got to do with managing my time, and what I can't be doing is going around as a salesman. I probably wouldn't be very good at it either. And as it is, I find that commissions obviously are a challenge to manage whilst trying to work where, take my work where I'd like it to go in the future.
Tim, I know it's 8:10. Are you okay to continue for about another 10 minutes worth of questions? Is that okay? Because there are lots of them. Thank you so much with it. A couple of little things on your books to begin with. Obviously, there's people heading off over to Amazon as we speak. It's one question from Peter was, are Tim's books just picture-based, or do they include how you did it and so on?
There's not a lot of how I did it, I'm afraid. It does try to explore. I mean, often I'm pretty dyslexic, so I tend to sort of do the research and then let someone actually write it up, but the ideas are very much formulated by me. The books I've done, like More Than Human, what I've been trying to do is explore some of the debates around the animals, like some of the subjects I touched on this evening. So there isn't really how I've done it, i.e. how I've broken down the technical side so much.
I'm just going to take back my screen a minute, because I've got quite a few questions on here that I've managed to put down during the quizzing. Before we get there, Tim, if you don't mind me asking, how do you determine the charges for both the speculative work and the commission work, or is that all handled by the agent?
The thing is that the charges vary hugely. If I'm doing, I mean, for example, I've just done the O2 campaign with the dog shaking, which I think many of you probably have seen, as it's on. I think it's fairly extensive at the moment. And those sort of campaigns, they'll work out a day rate, and then there'll be a buyout normally. And so sometimes I'll do something for an editorial, like I went off to do something for Harper's Bazaar, photographing a dog that was considered the cutest dog in the world, and I will often not even really make a profit from that, and then I'll do a commission where it's going global, and there'll be quite reasonable buyout figures, and that negotiation is something that I've left to my representatives to manage, because I think that they'll come to me and say, are you willing to do something for what might not be a very high fee, because this is part of kind of the journey of my work and making it more relevant commercially, that I might do something for a magazine, but then the advertising might be more linked into buyouts, and we have to view whether something is strategically interesting and something I want to do for other reasons, and when it's purely, in a sense, allowing me the commercial reward that allows me to give time to develop my other work. I mean, ultimately, I'd like to think that I'm trying to do my work commercially so that it allows me the facility to continue what I want to do with my work. And so I have to constantly see everything on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. As far as when they do buy out an image as such, do you still get to actually use the image for your own usage, or is it a total control of that photograph or series of photographs?
It's not often that images I shoot commercially tend to be so relevant to my personal exhibition work. Occasions they are. For example, there's one of a black raven that I showed in this presentation, and that was done for a heavy metal band commissioned by Warner Brothers. And that's an example where I had to go to them and say, would you mind me selling it as art in the gallery? Ironically, sometimes the art in the gallery is more valuable than the commission would be. But for them, that's not a problem, because if you say to someone, well, I'm elevating your project to art, they're usually quite supportive. They like the idea. People who commission work, the idea that something's been kind of elevated to another area. So I generally ask for the rights for exhibition, but as I say, not often does a commission like the O2 campaign end up being something that I expect to show in a museum.
Perfect. Some people are asking about a buyout as such. Really, do you want to briefly explain that?
Yes. The way it works is that with the copyrights and the sort of usage is that in the UK, when we do a commission, usually there's a fee. So say the fee was 5,000 a day, to say hypothetically, then the use of the images for maybe a pan-European campaign might be another 5,000, or it could be a lot more. The difference, that's really what you call a buyout. It's not usually what we call for perpetuity, that is indefinitely, although sometimes that's requested. So they say, we'll only do the shots, we want to pay you one lump sum, and we will have the images forever. And you know, that does happen. But in America, usually it's based on the number of images you do and the kind of way they run it. So they don't distinguish a daily rate, whereas we tend to in Europe have a daily rate, which we have a multiple of usually 100% royalty on top of that. So usage, right? So in America, it's quite often that there are very huge numbers, because it might be you do some very simple shots of a subject against a white background, but they run them all nationally, and then or cross-state, and then suddenly the fees go very high because they buy each image out, and it's all based not on day rate, but actually how the images are then how they're going to be run.
Perfect, thank you. We touched on selling via galleries and so on. Do you think this is difficult for many photographers to actually get their work into galleries? Obviously, you're quite a specialist now, so people are looking for your work. But when you first got going, was it something that you kind of thought that you would be doing, was selling your images as art through a gallery?
I think I was always felt very privileged if somebody put my work up on a wall. It felt like it was working in a different way, an image. And I always find that very rewarding, that images kind of reflect differently and there's different type of information to obviously an advertising campaign. And that, sorry, do you want Mark repeat the question, because I'm sort of drifting here.
That's okay. It was just really, as far as galleries was concerned, how difficult it was initially to get into a gallery to sell your work, and then obviously where you are now, because you're quite a specialist. For the up-and-coming art photographer, do you think it's a realistic kind of approach to get into galleries nowadays?
I think that the gallery, as we call it, gallery, has different levels, and I say different levels. Obviously, you know, for example, Gursky can sell a picture for £1 million or more, and he's part of a certain industry in a certain museum space, and if you take the majority of work that's sold in the high street in what we call salon-type galleries, where basically it's for decorative work, there are many of those. They don't demand a critical contextualization of the work. And I think that you asked me, it's difficult. I think there's a vast range of galleries, and there could be something in, out of town where people go in and they find something that is decorative rather than critical. And I think the role of the artist today is very much about bringing meaning to things, but not necessarily the kind of traditional ideas of craft. And as such, I think that there is a vast kind of range from what is shown at Frieze and what might be very popular in a sort of in a gallery that is people can walk off the street. So in terms of ease of getting into it, I think this is an interesting point, because this might be that I think you need something that you bring to it, something I can say distinctive, but there will always be a request for beautiful landscape shots or something, dramatic landscape shots, but those landscape shots might not translate to the conceptual art market. What I'm trying to say, it's very tiered, and it's also about the ideas and debates you bring forward as well. So I think it's quite reasonable and accessible to get work to sell in the high street for a few £100 or £1,000, but very different matter if you want to build into the kind of contemporary art market.
Thank you.
That's far more challenging.
It is. Underwater equipment, we saw obviously things like the jellyfish and some of the other kind of insects and animals. How are you shooting those?
Most of the time I'm actually shooting through a Chrysler tank with a jellyfish, which is designed to actually allow to recreate the open water effect. So that is just side-lit through an acrylic kind of aquarium. The horses, for example, I was using an old film camera borrowed from a well-known photographer called Holloway, John, but from an underwater photographer who didn't need her film camera anymore because she's gone digital. And I shot that, and I had somebody, the local diving instructor in Dubai, holding me alongside the training area for the horses underwater. So that was actually in scuba kit, but often I've got away with having to get wet at all.
Printing and presentation, when you put up your work in an exhibition in the likes of museum, or if it's up for sale, have you got a preference of how it kind of looks and so on?
I think that the thing is that you might display work in a much more minimal way, either through acrylic dye bond, which means like an acrylic almost surface, and it's mounted onto, dry mounted onto either aluminium or dye bond. It's called acrylic dye bond, and that often means you don't have to have a complex frame around it, or the frame can be very, very thin. So for purposes of display, that's great, but if you're a collector, then you don't really want to necessarily collect something that the cleaner could scratch easily, and you can't retrieve the print because it's bound together. So what often I might do is display a work in a convenient and not hugely expensive way, and then recommend that the person buying the print, which is then reframed for them, that is then framed under museum glass, non-reflective, UV, protected, and a proper box frame that can be if you might say, reframed in the future, so that I protect the potential, the future of the work. I also want people to benefit from my work in the future. So if that sort of answers it, so on the one hand I'm displaying copies of work in ways that I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for archivalness.
Thank you. And best-selling images, have you got an image that sells time and time and time and time again? Is it is there one secret image?
I do have images that the the editions have run out on, or certain sizes have, and one of them, they're not always, I can say, the most critical ones. They tend to be ones like the dog that looks like a mop, or the ones of the pheasants flying with the dog coming through the bracken, or even the panda, which is very popular when it went to my show at the end of last year. So these images, I suppose, are very, very much recognized as my style of work. Sometimes cuteness can outweigh a critical level of the work. I think some of the images, like the cockerel, for me are much more feathers chicken, much more kind of interesting debates, but clearly they're not the sort of thing that decorates your flat. And although I know museums have bought some of the copies, I suspect that it'll take longer to sell them out.
Great. Couple more and things, really, if you don't mind. You can tell there's a lot of business people online today because of all the business questions going through. By the way, this is the image, Tim, that I try to buy online, and I still find it very frustrating that I can't buy your images online. I've got to visit a gallery. Is there any reason, just for my own personal thing for a minute, is there any reason why you don't sell anything online?
This was the image, wasn't it?
Yeah. Is there any reason why you don't sell online?
Yes, because you have to let the galleries do their work. In a way, if they're representing you, it kind of undermines their role, and that's partly why I don't sell online, because I think it's impossible to have a kind of to work practically with galleries in fairness to them and their investment in you. So if they do a show and then all it means is someone phones you up and says, "Please, can I have a print?" You say, "Of course." It's not really it's not really workable or sustainable. Also, you've got to consider that it depends whether you want your prints one day to be hundreds of thousands of pounds or tens of thousands of pounds rather than hundreds. You have to, in a way, I wouldn't say control it too much. I mean, there is a point where, ironically, photography that is truly reproducible medium has become the medium that is rarefied. There's a fashion now to do one-offs, and that's very popular within the art world. But I think there is a point to control it, although I'd like to think that my work, although some of the editions are controlled, there are many aspects in which I proliferate the work through books and other forms.
Thank you. Then things like book publishing and things, was that something that you instigated yourself, or were you just approached when your work became more and more kind of popular?
Sort of yes and no. I was conscious that I needed to initiate projects to kind of dive in and start researching things, because you do need urgency, I think, to start a journey of inquiry. And yet, in the case of the publisher, they approached me. They'd seen my work in various annuals, particularly in PDN and Communication Arts in America, and they had they often picked their talent for their books, their authors, by following various awards and approaching people. They say they very rarely ever take a proposal put to them. So really I was approached, and then after I did that I was approached by quite a few publishers. I think the whole book industry is going through a huge change, as you can probably see by the number of books shops closing. Illustrated books, as we know, are definitely changing. I feel very lucky to have had a chance to do these illustrated books, but I suspect in the future I will do books that will, in a sense, concentrate on the form of my ideas. Maybe won't be sold in such numbers, but will be purer in the ideas I'm pursuing, and hopefully more relevant.
Perfect. And the last question, colour or black and white, which is your favourite?
Well, my favourite is that's most relevant and in a sense creates the experience I want. It's not to say that I wouldn't use black and white. Obviously there was a time when it was hard to control colour to the degree, but I would like to think that's an open question. It's difficult to work too much in black and white without, in a sense, being associated with the kind of history and thus, in a sense, the retro aspect of black and white. But I do think that reducing things to simple black and white obviously there can be a situation where that is the way to go. So what I don't want to say yet that one or the other, but inevitably I've shot more colour than black and white, but I'm open to whether that is the future. I'm about to progress with a project for a museum where I'm working with cyanotypes, linking back to Anna Atkins, who published in 1853 a series of British algae, and I'll be recreating those in the studio. And also I'm shooting seaweeds, effectively what they are, in full color photograms as well as on light boxes. So I will be merging black and white and color on that occasion.
Tim, thank you so much for everything tonight. I know we've gone well past the hour, approaching an hour and a half. Thank you so much for all your time, Tim. I've been enthralled, and with the amount of questions going through was just absolutely brilliant. Thank you everybody for attending tonight and kind of staying with us towards the end. Just remember to check out timflach.com. That's timflach.com. Where you can kind of find all the information about Tim's work, his portfolio, as well as his books. I've posted in the chat room anyway, and I'll do it later on today in the Facebook page on the Academy side, where you can actually go off and get Tim's books from through the likes of Amazon and so on. And I promise you, you will not disappoint yourself when you see the reproduction quality on the books. It's just absolutely tremendous. Thank you, Tim, for inspiring not only me but hundreds who joined us tonight. I will say we had a little bit of sound issues, nothing to do with you, but something to do with Citrix, with some people joining us, kind of thing. So again, we'll make that fully available on the recording, and we'll get it out as soon as we can. Tim, anything you'd like to actually finish off with at all?
No, I just think that this is an amazing way to communicate, and I guess you're very much looking to the future in how we can share our thoughts around the medium. It's been a privilege to be on this, and so thank you very much, and and good night.
Thank you very much, Tim. I know it was a bit of a daunting experience at the beginning where you were not looking to a crowd of people, but I promise you there's people in their homes and workplaces throughout the world having their lunchtimes or whatever it is, enjoying your kind of work. And some of the comments that we've had just going through, I mean, speechless, amazing, life-changing, business-changing, I can't wait to get out and pick up the camera and shoot the family pet. Fingers crossed they meant photograph the family pet as such, really. Visits to the zoo, I'm going to learn how to shoot better photography. I'm going to increase my composition beyond belief. I can't wait to actually start to take my photography to a different direction thanks to Tim and his work. I can't wait to buy his book. I mean, Tim, it just goes on and on and on and on.
I feel very privileged, so thank you.
And fingers crossed we'll get you back again, perhaps, and perhaps we could do something like, the one book at a time and actually discuss that and things really. But I won't push my luck at this stage. I know we're cheeky actually asking you on for one night. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you for your team as well, for all their help and actually putting this together, and Jay as well, for one of our guys actually in the office actually communicating and kind of getting all this tied up to begin with. I'll give him a big tap on the back for actually putting it together. So that's the end of tonight's webinar. Thank you very much. As I said, I'll be putting all the links straight away onto the Photographer Academy Facebook page. And in case you don't know where that is just going through, it should be showing you now. It's facebook.com/The Photographer Academy. And don't forget to go off and like Tim's Facebook page as well. Just do a quick search on that, Tim Flach. Remember, it's TIMFLACH, and you'll be able to find your way. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Have a great night wherever you are in the world. Cheers now. Take care. Bye-bye.